Recorded live from the mats of Radical MMA in New York City. The Martial Culture Podcast. Your source for in-depth combat sports and martial arts insights with Coach Renee Dreyfus and Matt Peters. Ring the bell and let's get it on.
Let's get it on. Renee?
Matt?
How's it going?
Great. Great to see you after a week's break.
Yeah, people loved the last episode. It's doing very, very well.
The one with Steve?
Yeah, Dr. Sundaraj.
Yeah,
it's doing very, very well. So we needed to take a week off so people could catch up and listen to all the backlogs of everything that we've been doing over the last couple of weeks.
I'm sorry that we missed the commentary on the Kevin Lee fight, though. That was pretty amazing.
Amazing fight.
Amazing fight. Where's your take on that Cole card?
He looked so good, Kevin Lee. He was so athletic. He had good stamina. I wasn't super surprised because he's always been a great fighter, but I was very excited to see this level, and I'm very excited to see where he goes next.
Now, there was a time where I felt the 155 division was like not as vibrant as it used to be, and I think that's why there's a little opening for Conor McGregor, and but now you have guys coming up who are just stone cold killers and great in every aspect of the game. And one thing that impressed me tremendously was Kevin Lee's ability to take that shot. Did you see the spinning wheel kick that he got caught in?
Yes, I did.
Yeah. And then he just went from getting almost knocked out, instantly he shot. And what that is like years and years and years of just practice and heart and determination. And he won. I thought, that doctor who stopped the fight for the cut, obviously the fight was not going that Barbosa's way, but I think it was a little early because it seemed like he could still see. But anyway, it's not bad to err on the side of fighter safety. It
was a good fight all around. But before we go any further, the voice from the other side of the room, we should introduce our special guest. Renee, do the honors and give him the due he deserves.
This is my really great friend and student, but I learned just as much from him as he learns from me. His name is Eugene Lin, and he is been doing martial arts almost all his life, and in so many different martial arts. And he's honored me by having, for the last 10 years, trained with me in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and MMA, because he's always such the consummate student. One martial art is not enough. This man has mastered so many. And it's just great to have him on the show. And we just kind of want to discuss, we always talk about arm martial arts, but Eugene is a knife fighting master. So, he's going to say I'm not a master.
Did you bring your knives with you?
No, I didn't.
Okay. That's probably for the best.
But I want to talk, just change the subject a little bit and talk about, we talk about self-defense, but if we're talking about self-defense, we have to include a concrete discussion of knife fighting arts. And he's, amazing understanding of these disciplines, both Western and Eastern. But Eugene, tell us a little about yourself, buddy.
Well, okay. Hey, thanks for that, the kind words and the introduction.
All true.
That was great. My name's Eugene Lin. As Renee has mentioned, I've been a martial arts enthusiast for a while. Knife master, indeed. No, okay. So, all right. Then
you started. What martial art did you start with?
Well, okay. I actually started off with Jeet Kune Do.
Right. Yeah. We're here in New York? Or?
Here in New York, New York Martial Arts Academy, which still exists.
They have
like in a form out there. Yeah, a somewhat different location, but and then that's actually how I got involved in Filipino martial arts.
But did you did fencing? Did you do fencing before Jeet Kune Do, or was that after Jeet Kune Do?
Well, what happened is that was it in terms of there we go. In terms of like team sports, like combative sports, it was fencing first.
Yeah.
I did that when I was at Johns Hopkins.
Right.
Great team. It was the first time that it was actually the first time that I'd piled into a van and gone like up and down the coast looking for let's go to VMI. We're going to VMI. Oh, what's going?
What is VMI?
Oh, Virginia Military Academy.
Oh, for the fencing championships, right.
And,
and so you've done fencing, Jeet Kune Do, and your main knife fighting style is Dikiti Tirsia.
Well, right? Yeah,
and also Wing Chun as well, right?
Right. Like a lot of people in the in the early '90s, JKD was the gateway to things like Wing Chun,
right.
To things like to Filipino Kali, Eskrima, as well as as well as other things like CLOT. Although I never really
Right.
did CLOT. That was other people's.
Yeah, it was really interesting I want to just get the introduction over a little bit, but really interested in talking to what those differences are, because I'm not really so knowledgeable about it. But anyway, I want to say I just interrupt this guy a little bit. I want to say this guy is pretty amazing. All right, not just as a martial artist, but everybody talks about not having enough time to train, and I can't tell how many times people are like, I don't have enough time to train, blah blah blah. So Eugene is actually, he graduated Johns Hopkins in medical studies and became a pharmacologist, and then didn't tell anybody, but entered law school, and never missed training, never missed a day of training like regular, and the guy's working full time, going to school. Pretty much almost full time, right?
Yeah, it was.
And training and not moaning about it like a little wussy. He comes in, gives his best, and I'd be like, Eugene, did you sleep last night? He's like, no.
Wow.
If you remember, there were a bunch of mornings when I would kind of wind up to the front desk, and it was like my forehead would hit the table. that was just lovely.
But the man, because I want to say it's been a little late, but congratulations on graduating law school and passing the bar.
Hey, thanks for that.
Yeah,
Wow.
that's
So,
pretty amazing.
You're pharmacist, lawyer, knife master?
Fencer,
one could argue that it's like, man, you just never succeed at anything, right? You got to have some time. So, what's up with this guy?
I think you succeed at everything.
Yeah.
What's next?
Hopefully, what's next is a little bit of vacation.
Oh.
No, I'm like,
No, please take a vacation. Take a break. You want to sit in the corner over there for the rest of the day?
There's this health lawyers association thing that I do, and they're looking for volunteers to help with this like an opioid addiction.
Oh wow, that's amazing! Look at you.
I don't know how much I'm going to work on it. We'll see. But
wow, that's fantastic.
Cool,
yeah. See, and community oriented too.
My gosh.
But
and ladies, are you single?
Oh, good lord.
Because your resume reads very well.
And Matt, how old do you think he is? Take a guess.
26.
Yeah, right. Sure. Thanks. Okay.
Tell him how old you are, Gene.
I'm 49.
No way.
Yes.
Get
right?
out of here.
Yeah, he's 49.
Turn off your mic. Get out. You're not 49.
Yeah, I'm 49.
Guy.
Yep.
He's a year older than me.
According to my driver's license, anyways. Yeah.
Wow.
And this is like great martial arts living. Is that Eugene? I don't tell him this so much because as a teacher you can't say too many good things.
He's your favorite student.
No,
All right,
but
we got
he
it.
epitomizes what it
the
means
case.
to be a dedicated martial arts. Not, we were talking about not so interested in competing in MMA or things like that. Maybe, who knows? But he's more interested in the day-to-day, getting better 1%, not making excuses, and doing the best he can. And, there's some days where I'm on him like crazy. I'm like, why are you messing this up? Because that's just kind of the way I am. Mm-hmm. But, he's like, the little engine that could, or the big hulking engine that could.
I think next you should write a book.
Yeah, you really should. But before we go on to really talking to Eugene, and thank you for that wonderful introduction.
Yeah,
I hope you
Eugene,
don't
be
mind.
quiet.
Yeah, that's right. I'll step to the side now. Thank you.
No, but I want to say congratulations on that UFC to my friend David Branch. Did you see his fight?
No. You're friends with David Branch?
Yeah, we used to train together. Remember we talked about that when he fought Luke Rockhold. So David Branch and I used to train a little bit together as blue belts, and we're great friends. And I have absolute tremendous respect for him. He unfortunately did not come with the W against Luke Rockhold a while ago, but he came back and fought Maleta, who is a dangerous knockout artist. I mean, unbelievable. And everybody thought he was going to lose. And he wound up pure, beautiful basics, just overhand pump, knocked him out. And just absolutely fantastic boxing. And I'm so happy to say that he's back on the W track. And he's one who's going to be, he's the World Series of Fighting champion. And he, unfortunately, he's had some difficulty in the UFC getting used to the venue maybe, and upping his training. But he's doing great. And I was really impressed with the just extremely technical display of boxing. Just absolutely beautiful. If you look at the replay, it was like he touched his jaw and the guy just went out. And which brings us to, that was the one we missed, which brings us to the big news. And it was Frank Mir and Fedor, and everybody counted Fedor out on this one, and he came out with the KO win, which was pretty amazing.
Yeah, never count Fedora out.
Never count Fedora.
Don't pull on Superman's cape and never count Fedora out.
And it was unbelievable. And is the I think it was an uppercut or hook from hell. I think it was a hook, right? Just and just knocked him senseless. And one thing about that position, and this is a criticism of jiu-jitsu, is we don't value the spiral turtle control as a valid back control. Whereas if you notice when a person's on all fours and you're on the side and you have a hip control on them, that is statistically one of the highest knockout percentage positions in MMA. And in most grappling arts, it's not valued as a control position. But you're very, very vulnerable. And not only did he hit him with the hook, but when he went down, he hit him with, I think, 4 consecutive uppercuts from underneath the armpit. And let me tell you, you don't want Fedor cocking his arm back, into Iowa and uppercutting you. So it's just another show of how MMA grappling is different from regular grappling. Of course, it was short, and it started with a big punch, but still, Anthony Johnson was someone who from that position also has lost from that position too. It goes back to Matt Serra was just inducted in the Hall of Fame, but if you look at Matt Serra's loss and his rematch to George St. Pierre, the entire fight was him being controlled and turtle and eating knees to the ribs. Just it's hard fight to watch. You think he probably broke like a bunch of ribs, but turtle control is something that is not scored in jiu-jitsu, but kind of should be when we expand to thinking about more MMA jiu-jitsu. And that was kind of my take on that fight.
So what does Mir do next? Does he start a podcast and retire, or does
no, it's part of the tournament. So now he's fighting. He's fighting the winner of King Mo and Bader. So King Mo and Bader. The winner of that fights the winner in their bracket, and then they meet in the championship. So it's like I think the next one. The last one was Chael San. Oh, right. Mir's gonna so Mir retires, but Fedor fights Chael Sonnen. That's right. That's what happens. Mir's out of the tournament, right?
Mir goes home.
Yeah, Mir goes home, right? Mir does goes back to his motorcycles. No, he's that's why he's kind of like not as good as he used to because he had a big motorcycle accident.
Right. How old is Frank Mir? I need to know.
I have no idea. He's younger than me, I'm sure.
I would say he's older than everybody in this room.
I think he's 37, probably 38.
38.
38, yeah. Well, I'm 10
He doesn't look 38.
I'm 10 years older.
We just had a conversation about age, and Eugene looks like he's 25. And
how old are you, Matt?
I'm not want to play the guessing game. I'm 34.
You're 34. No, you
you
look very young. You have a very young face.
If I shave my face, I'll look like I'm 22.
Yeah, you have
But then I just look weird. I accidentally shaved my face once because it's a weird story. I woke up too early. I was really tired. I was doing the clippers.
Yeah.
I had it set at the lowest setting, so I had no hair left. I came out of the bathroom and I said I made a mistake, and my wife was like, "Ugh." She did not like it. So it took me about a week to get back to normal. But right. I digress.
Anyway, so just that's going over the fights this past weekend, the weekend before, and it was a real display of on Kevin Lee's part of great grappling, mere MMA grappling, and just impressive. And the whole Bellator show showcased some people. Rafael Lovato winning with grappling, with jiu-jitsu technique, and Dylan Danos, who I'm not really a big fan of, but he did win, though his opponent was 2-4, wasn't exactly the highest level opponent, but for his first fight, that's definitely a win and good for him. So yeah, and then Neiman Gracie. We were talking about the Gracies. Neiman Gracie is doing very well in Bellator, and kind of the only Gracie actively, fighting at this moment. But he had a really impressive win. So it was a real night of grappling, and Fedor's MMA grappling, and Kevin Lee is a force to be reckoned with his takedown game.
We just got a request from one of our fans that we never talk about Bellator ever again. It's weird. It just popped up on the screen.
Really? Well,
they said, don't talk about Bellator. Don't give Bellator.
I can kind of understand that Bellator is like the inbred cousin of the UFC.
It's weird.
They take all the rejects from the UFC and bring them in.
The username
but they have some good guys.
The username for the fan was D White. I don't know what that means.
I
don't know who that is. It could be anybody.
Could be anybody.
I see.
Anyway, but getting back to Eugene and your martial journey, because that's really what I want to talk to you. So you started in fencing and Jeet Kune Do, and then you moved on to
go ahead. So what happened is that I fenced for a while, and that was very cool. after school, I found Jeet Kune Do, and and of course I went with a friend of mine. And after I think a year, I was the only guy,
Left,
he'd
yeah.
left, and I was still around. And I actually stuck around for a bit until the initial incarnation of Naima closed. And but by that time, a buddy of mine was, and I were like, hey, yeah, let's see if we can find something not the equivalent of this, but start exploring, like different aspects of the martial arts. So we wound up going to this Golden Gloves gym. Was it on Queens Boulevard? That was fun. I'd never done actual just flat out boxing before. Everything that I'd learned from was it like a JKD aspect?
Savati kind of oriented.
Yeah, exactly. So that was a bit of an eye opener. I claim no true boxing knowledge, although what I will say is that just by being there and by you get your knocks,
You absorb for sure.
Yeah, exactly. That was and then the next step was Wing Chun. And that happened basically because a friend of mine met a Wing Chun instructor on the trains of New York, and we wound up striking up a friendship with him, and the rest of that was basically just Wing Chun for many years. While that was happening, though, we met this one fellow who did Dikiti Tertia. A shout out to. Was it Eric Shute was out in Newark, and that was Dikiti Tertia, as you said, which was it's not an offshoot of Bikiti Tertia. The two arts are actually they were kind of like the same art for a while, but one fellow was Nene Tortal, and the other fellow Leo Gahe. They went on separate paths.
Decided to go their own thing, right?
And
those, for the listeners who don't know, that these are two Kali arts, or Screamer or Kali.
Right. Well, okay.
That's a question. But knife fighting arts is a Filipino tradition.
Yeah. Basically these are all family arts to one extent or another, and what happens is that the names Kali, Eskrima, these things are largely they're not really indicative of what's in it. One could argue that Eskrima, Kali, etc. These are kind of made up names.
Really, that's interesting. I'd like to get back to that point. And so, how long? But later, what is the difference between the styles? But how long have you been doing Dikiti Tertia?
Oh, so let's see. Good gosh. So I started it was a while ago, 2006. So it's been 12 years.
Wow, that's amazing.
It's a long time. I also did some Pikiti Tertia as well, but that's that I haven't spent as much time doing. That's seminars. I know guys who do Pikiti Tertia. Although what I will say is that I really do like Pikiti Tertia's training method. It's the stuff gets broken down in a way that I like. Dikiti Tertia, which is a great art, and I still practice it to this day. It has their training methods are good, but it's a lot more like energy drills to one extent or another. You're and a lot of the application actually comes from you having a relationship with your teacher. We'll go say, oh yeah, by the way, this is how you actually do it.
It's funny you should, because I had some similar experiences in the karate world. It's like you go through the instructor motions, but you don't really learn until you kind of sit down with your instructor and he says, well, this is how you do it.
Right.
And so there's something, I think a lot of these styles, including boxing, where you really only learn in the one-on-one mentorship, and yet they've been transitioned to a classroom model.
Right.
And so there's only so much you can absorb from the classroom model, like the group model of 10 guys there, or 12 or whatever, maybe 50. And I know karate suffered from this because it became, the old Okinawan teachings were always one-on-one or two-on-one. It was your family art. And then when it transitioned to Japan, it became more like a calisthenic, like a gym class kind of feel, like it was a group art. And because there's only so many people you can teach in one-on-one privates, right? And so I think a lot of nuances were lost. And when you sit down with your instructor, you're like, oh. And but anyway.
Yeah.
So I want to get back to knife fighting.
Okay.
So you're really interesting because you have this Western fencing experience, and you have the Filipino experience. And when you're doing Wing Chun, did you do any of the Wing Chun weaponry as well?
Well, yeah, I mean, Wing Chun weaponry is like the butterfly
swords, right,
and the and that really long pole they do. That was largely done for conditioning. Although once again, it's like when you ask your teacher, it's like, okay, fine. So what exactly did they do?
Right.
You get you get a bit more of a window in the actual fencing tradition. In some cases, some instructors they either won't tell you or they don't really know, which is perfectly fine. It's like, okay, yeah, sure, these things can be used for conditioning. And to bring out superior attributes in terms of like empty hand. But the truth of the matter is that there is a fencing tradition out there, and it tends to be pretty ruthless. I mean, if you think about it, all edged weapon arts
are ruthless.
Are pretty ruthless because it's like, oops, maybe
slit your throat.
Or to be more specific, you're in a situation where it's like these things were developed in like third world countries, for lack of a better term, and it's like, okay, fine, he's got a knife too, or to be more specific, he's got a gun,
right,
or he's got a buddy, and they're and things are not going to go down in a very, very pretty way,
right?
So
that's another interesting thing is that most Japanese martial arts transition from the jitsu to the do, which is they were ruthless fighting arts. But in the turn of the 19th to the 20th century, they said this is not productive way of training for our youth. So they were defanged at some level, made into holistic training methods that could be sportized. And then, I think the Gracies were like, wait a minute, we want to keep this more fighting tradition, which is one of the reasons I think why they kept the jiu-jitsu term. Obviously, there's many reasons, but the do, like karate do, or kempo jitsu, which is another word for striking arts of
Sure.
Okinawa, right? Jitsu versus do. Jitsu is like the technique, and do is like a larger, more spiritual way. And even Kano, when he created judo, he's like, let's leave jiu-jitsu behind. Let's strive to be good citizens. And I always compare judo to being like in the Boy Scouts, and definitely Filipino martial arts, eskrima, and any knife fighting martial art, they don't have that. They're like, I'm here to kill you.
What I'd say is that a lot of this material has been modified for consumption by like other martial arts. So as an example, it's Pekiti Tirsha made its rounds number one via JKD, right. but it was taught on a seminar circuit to various like karate schools, etc.
Right.
So what would happen is that like they develop a form, or or they would create like 64 attacks is essentially that. More on that later, but number one, it's a great form if you know what it is. So what happens is that they would develop these training methods so that they could teach these movements at these schools, and then it's like, oh, you know what? When I come around in 3 months,
right.
I'll show you.
Again, it's the issue of large-scale teaching.
Like
you don't have this one-on-one mentorship. So
exactly,
how do you transmit this knowledge?
Exactly.
Especially in ages before YouTube and things like that.
Exactly. So, from what I understand, and this is just from what I've got like a bit of a peek into that world. I never really lived in it. What happened is that these were all family arts to begin with. So you didn't really learn by saying, okay, fine, we have these sets, and we have these motions, and we have this, and what have you. You learn from your uncle.
Yeah.
And he would teach you one thing, and then you would have more than one uncle, right? You'd have like 8 uncles,
right.
Whether or not they were, were like related to you.
Yeah.
And 7th uncle would teach you this, and 6th uncle would teach you that, and blah, 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 so on and so forth. And and then was it by the time you were like a teenager, it's like, oh, you knew quite a lot, but it's not like the learning was much more organic in that fashion.
No, actually, I would say it's reminds me of the Gracie family's origin story, where you'd had Helion Gracie, who was known as the guard guy, and you had Hickson, who was known as the pressure guy, And in the Machados, who I trained with, Hegan was the passer, and John Jacques was the tricky guard fighter. Hojer Machado was more the mental training guy, and everybody had their little role, and you learn from each guy a little bit. I didn't train that much. I didn't train really with anybody other than Hegan Machado, and to then I wasn't training regularly because I didn't live in California. But when I trained with him, it was almost all with him. But every now and again, one of the other brothers would drop by, and you'd say, "Oh, here's a different look," and you're right. It becomes more organic. And I think jiu-jitsu still has that element where sometimes you learn from the senior student who's really good at triangles or this or that. But you're right. I mean, when you're teaching a large amount of people, you have to codify it in some way. But it's interesting. What gets lost in that codification? What details? This is why Hickson said he would never make a DVD set.
I see.
He changed. He's coming out with the instructionals right now. But he said, and again, to reach people. But he said, I would never teach other than one-on-one for many years, because he's like, I can't actually teach it unless I'm there feeling your energy, feeling what you do, mentoring you. And Elliot Gracie was the same way. He's like, people don't realize when you went to the Gracie Academy in the 50s, it was all one-on-one training for the first year. You didn't do anything but privates. So there was no class. But then you can't reach them. And people might not know, but Elliot Gracie the academy wound up going bankrupt. They couldn't pay the bills.
There we go. Yeah, couldn't get any
You
people.
can't pay the bills. So it's like when you enter modern society, you have to change a little bit. The organic structure goes away because you're dealing with too many people.
Yeah, I mean, and I'll just wax educational just for a moment, just because I was just in school, right?
Yeah.
So when you when you're like you got some class, when you whatever it is in constitutional law, whatever, and and you get handed the syllabus, right? And this thing is like 15 pages long or whatever, and you take a look, and was it number one, you get the idea that this is all you need to know, all right. But number two, you also know that you're not going to learn all of it over the course of the semester. This is aspirational,
Right.
So if you combine those two attitudes in martial arts, it seems to me, okay, what happens is that you wind up with this constantly dwindling basis of knowledge. Because it's like, you codified this thing, and to one extent or another, even if you didn't tell anybody that this is all you need to know, that's going to be an attitude for some, if not many.
Yeah.
And then what's going to happen is over time, let's say over the course of, I don't know, 4 years.
Yeah,
well, no, actually, I'm not even talking about decades. I'm talking about 4 years, 5 years. What'll happen is that, you'll only absorb, I should say, maybe 80% of that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And then, but by that time, this person is teaching as well.
Right.
Perhaps they have their own academy. Hard to say, right? And they codify their own. They recodify their material, and it's shrunk.
You're
and
absolutely
then,
right.
And then it shrunk again, and then it shrunk again, and then it shrunk again.
You're absolutely right, and you're 100% right, and especially I think when people don't fight.
Right.
And this is why, MMA was such a big thing. It's like, whoa, there's so much we don't know. Well, honestly, in karate, because I came from originally some karate background, karate had grappling. People, mostly stand-up, not ground. But there's stand-up grappling. There's Okinawan grappling melded in with the striking. And the same thing with boxing. People don't realize that Marquis de Queensberry removed stand-up grappling from boxing. So you're absolutely right. This is a process, whatever the reason, whether it's sport eyes or just the natural diminishing knowledge base. The arts, I found in the 80s when we were training, because we're the same generation, have been so diminished to what they originally were. And it was when you come back and fight, you're like, oh crap, I need to know this.
In this, I thoroughly agree with you. In this, I think it's a lack of understanding of what you're actually looking at, because if you lack that context, as you say, fighting, in any sort of application, right? That's what's missing, because that mentorship has been stripped away for practical reasons, make no mistake. So what you wind up with is it's like, well, I cannot say what's important. I can't in what I see before me. Yes, there are basics, there are fundamentals, etc. But there's much more than that there. That's represented in whatever crystallization you want to discuss, right? So then you go, but I lack the fundamental context to determine what's important. I mean, just for me, much less other people.
Right,
I mean,
right.
I just don't know. So I only learn what kind of makes sense maybe. So hence it's shrinking, But if you put it back through the lens of application, then you realize that, what I'm looking at is not it's not like everything that I need to know, but rather it's you know what, this is where you start,
Right.
and the extensiveness of certain curriculums, and that's a challenge. That's like, hey, yeah, you know what, like you're supposed to, okay, fine, you may not be great at everything, but you know what, this is, this is not the territory, but it is a map of like all the places that you should go.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's interesting because when I was in judo, I had teachers tell me, and I was read. It's fascinating. It's funny because I just read an article about this last night, and it says, I'm going to post it, Matt. I'm going to post it to our thing. It's what judo can learn from MMA. That's the title of the article. And when I was taking judo, they're like, learn 1 or 2 big throws, and then just learn a whole bunch of setups of it. And I'm like, just 1 or 2? They're like, yeah, just 1 or 2. That's it. That was my generation of judo in the early 90s, where it was like, yeah, just focus on 1 or 2 big throws, and there are ways to set up. You don't have to know the whole thing. Just focus on 1 or 2 throws. And you can't do that anymore. The game is too varied. You have to have, and you become a one-trick pony, and that's all you have. And so this judo teacher, and he's just talking about judo for the Olympics, right? We're not talking judo for MMA or anything like that.
Sure.
But he's saying, no, you have to know the Mongolian style. You have to know the Korean style. You have to know the European style. Now, the Russian style, the leg pickups have been banned in judo, unfortunately. The doubles and singles and things like that. But if that were there, you'd have to know that too. You'd have to have a facility in all these varied games, and maybe not be a master at each, but know the lay of the land. And he's like, this is what MMA is. It's like, okay, maybe you mastered a couple things here, for sure. You need to master certain things. But you have to have a deeper understanding of a variety of things. Not just a surface understanding, but a real deep understanding of all these other games. And he's like, look, and the big movement in judo now is Mongolian judo. Right? It's still judo. Yeah, it's still judo, but it's a style. Like it's not a different art. It's not a different martial art. It's a way of approaching winning in a judo match. And the Mongolians have their own martial art, wrestling martial art. And that usually feeds into sumo, but it feeds into judo too. So they have these variations of throws, particularly uchimata for the guys who don't know. But the way they do the uchimata is totally different. And it's never been done like that in Japan before. And now everybody's like, oh, Mongolian uchimata, this is great, and it's been around for about 10 years or so. And the Mongolians are a force in judo. They're a force. They're really amazing. And then, of course, there's the Korean grip, which was a style of gripping that's used in the Korean judo fighters. And there's a European style. And then there was the Russian style, which I said was now the rules don't allow that anymore. But even the Russian style has things that are not just double legs and single legs. There's other stuff too, which is allowed. But every country, every region has their own style. And the guy was saying, look, we have to have a facility in these different interpretations. And if we don't, you're not going to win. And I was like, wow, that's really fascinating because it's so different from the judo world that I brought in and so expansive. And I think it's indicative, and he titled the article, MMA, we should learn from MMA. And I think MMA has changed martial arts. Even if you never do MMA, if you do, I don't know, judo or taekwondo, you're influenced by that MMA thinking now, which is a wonderful thing. It's expansive, application-oriented, and just say, hey, it's not enough to just be in our little corner anymore. And I think that's fascinating. And it stops that isolation and diminishment of the art, which is why we have so many styles. Because honestly, fighting is fighting. If the rules of the universe or the planet Earth, gravity and momentum and things, inertia, these don't change. And you have 2 arms and 2 legs, so we're gonna basically fight the same. So why does styles exist? Because one guy was good at this, and he just focused on this. And one guy was good at this, at kicking, and he focused on this. And they little by little, got stuck in their own little silos. And MMA doesn't allow you to be stuck in your silo. You constantly have to reach out and learn ground fighting, learn clinching, And you could see in Mir's fight where you didn't see it in the replay, but because before the podcast started, we were just replaying the fight. But Fedor had a great judo setup, and judo's neglected. But I'll tell you, in 5 years, people will know they will not be able to MMA. You can't be a successful MMA fighter in 5 years unless you have some significant judo. That's the way it's going to evolve. Or MMA judo, clinch or Greco, right? Real clinch game, and you can't stay in your own silo. So anyway, I just want to say that the point you brought up was absolutely brilliant, and it really resonated with something I just read last night. But I want to just scale back a little bit and ask you to define, because there are a lot of listeners who've never done knife fighting or anything like that. Can you give us an overview of the Filipino traditions? Like, okay, you said there's no difference between a scream and kali fundamentally.
Okay.
But
can
you give us a brief history of those traditions and how you fit into it? And I promise I won't interrupt anymore.
Okay, no problem.
I'll turn his mic off.
Turn my mic off.
Okay, no problem.
You really did.
Okay, well, I'll tell you what. The history of the Philippines and the Philippine martial arts in general is long and varied. And I'm not going to attempt anything that consequential right here now. However, here's a brief overview. A lot of these family arts, they claim to be tribal arts. Some of them are, some of them aren't. Some of them, who knows? Okay, and you think of them these days marketed largely as stick-oriented, knife-oriented, blade-oriented, arts. Okay, and there are a variety of terms for them. Honestly, when I said these terms were made up, it's primarily because they were trying to differentiate their martial arts from Japanese martial arts, etc. A lot of these arts becoming commercial, as it were, was relatively recent, as you might expect.
So the names Kali and Eskrima didn't exist maybe 50, 60 years ago?
Yeah, they just weren't that common, from what I understand. In point of fact, when a lot of the Philippine martial arts first became commercial, they were marketed as combat judo, something along those lines, because it was just it's martial arts. I mean, what do we do? Okay, fine, all right, it's judo, maybe, right. And these arts, they had their origin in certain like indigenous arts,
right?
A lot of them though were they were kind of reconfigured. I guess you'd call them actually mixed martial arts, because they were greatly influenced by the arts of the people of the time.
Right.
Karate, judo, right, etc.
And the Japanese occupation of the Philippines, I'm sure, had some influence. It did in Korea.
Yeah.
It did in Taiwan.
Yeah.
And, these cultural osmosis.
The arguments have been made that these indigenous Filipino arts with stick fighting, blade fighting, etc. They were they absorbed material from all over the place, like the Spanish, for instance.
Right.
And I would say that. Like I said, I'm not a historian in that regard. However, in terms of just the Philippine martial arts that I've studied, clearly there were outside influences.
Right.
A little bit of fencing, clearly some Japanese martial arts. Even jiu-jitsu.
Right.
But they had their own take on weapons fighting.
Right. And is it mostly traditionally machete based or sword based or short knife based or stick based? And in a general sense, obviously each martial art is different, but karambits are Indonesian, right? They're not Filipino. Right?
They're also seen in Filipino martial arts, but they're Indonesian. That's for sure. Depending on the family, you have a variety of different blade types. Was it the Dikiti Tertia families? They're from the Visayans, so they have
that's the name of the family.
Yeah, no, that's the area where they're from. The area where they're from. So they have these I've seen Chris knives, those wavy blade things you use. But for the most part, where we're talking about real fighting swords, which kind of sort of look like farm implements. They kind of look like machetes, but they're not.
They're a little longer.
Oh well, what it is that they're they have these the stabbing points, etc. But they look like machetes, but they're not farm implements. Farm implements are farm
like
implements.
a gladius or something.
Yeah, it's single edged.
Yeah.
Etc. But yes, same idea. Similar dimensions. The gladius is mainly a stabbing weapon. More on that later. But these things are like cut and thrust, etc. And everybody over there's got a knife, right? Just because you come from a relatively rural culture and you need one.
Yeah.
So it's not like and everybody's got sticks because you
live in a forest.
You live in the forest, yeah, exactly. Or you live in a jungle, etc.
Yeah.
These are these are common things.
And I'm going to ask you. So I see a lot of talk, like the Sayak Kali guys will say we won't do sticks, or this or that. Like, what is the
Well, I would say I would say this. Certainly, there are arts that the sticks. They are safety stand-ins for swords. Okay, Dakiti and Prakiti Tertia claim this as well. All right, as well as Sayakali claims.
So
and
it's like
what?
a shinai, basically. It's
Right, exactly. So hence the the rattan stick. Even though it can really ding you up,
Right.
That
But you're not dead.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that is the safety equipment. I think it's largely true. There are the techniques that that are trained, that are shown. They are not necessarily club techniques. There's a little bit of overlap, but they are they're definitely like cutting techniques that are shown. And of course, you need an actual cutting implement in order to be able to do it to its full degree. Slice things.
Right.
And there we go. I think part of the idea perhaps is that, all right, fine. You know what? You've got machetes. You grew up. You grew up in a rural area. Like if you're not a farmer, you're certainly clearing brush all the time. You know how to cut stuff. Here, let me show you some targeting. Let me show you some.
Right.
etc. Yeah. So, do those guys, like let's say Sayak, do they have stick techniques? The answer is yeah, sure. In point of fact, one of the first stick tournaments I ever went to was a Sayak tournament, and
For the guys who don't know, Sayak are a famous family of American Filipinos who train a lot from people in movies and things like that. Right.
Right.
Yeah.
You're right. Indeed, that was I will say that when I went to that tournament, my God, that was a long time ago.
Was that in Jersey?
No, that was in New York.
No kidding. Because they have a big tournament scene now in Jersey, right?
They have
for
Jersey,
sticks, right?
Yeah. But I remember a bunch of us went. This was back when I was at New York Martial Arts Academy, and it was like, okay, fine, we're going to armor you up. It was lighter armor than the full on like Doce Pares, like helmet. Like helmet, like face helmet and all that other deal. Was it you could use the sticks, but you could also punch, kick, and throw. That was
great.
Yeah,
it's like what the Dog Brothers do.
Not quite. We had armor.
Right.
The Dog Brothers, the
they
armor,
go
armor. No, they still have fencing masks, but and gloves and what have you. But like the body armor has largely been removed. We went in with we went in with padded armor, but we were still we still punched, kicked, and threw.
Oh, that's great.
And I remember this was hilarious. The first time I ever got like Uchimata was at that tournament. The guy the guy grabbed me with like basically like he wrapped up my arm.
Right.
And
I know exactly what you're talking about. I don't want to interrupt, and please don't turn my mic off, Mike. But it's funny because what's the origin of Uchimata? And we talk about. I want to just segue a little bit away. The Waffle House shooting recently. There was a.
Oh yes.
And the movie just came out about the French shooting that was stopped by two Marines or Navy.
Train.
Yeah.
Was it a train?
And a train, right. And you notice almost every case where a active shooter is stopped, he's stopped with grappling.
Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah, always. Because it's not like I'm sure there's some sniper somewhere who shot guy, but it's not like a guy gets knocked out when he's holding a gun. You grapple with him, and almost always the guys who are successful had some jiu-jitsu training or judo training. A personal acquaintance of mine, he was on the airplanes in 9/11, Jeremy Glickman, and he was a judo man, and he was one of the people responsible for stopping the plane from crashing into DC. The one that
Right.
and obviously we don't know what happened, but he's a judo guy. He's, I'm sure he clinched with the guy, and that's how you stop weapons. You clinch with them. And if you look at I'm a historian of Japanese martial arts. If you look at a lot of the anti-sword combat, guy takes a swing at you, your sword breaks, you wrap up his arm, and you Uchimata him or Haraigoshi him.
Right,
That's the origin of that throw.
And then you get him on the
there you
ground.
go. You get him on the ground. Then you take your short knife out and stab him through the eye socket.
So actually, no. It is interesting because we didn't have this is just a stick tournament. It's not like you had some a knife in your pocket. So what he would do is he took the butt of his stick, the puño, and
started hitting you.
You started hitting me in the head.
Oh,
with
that sucks.
Yeah, it sucked. Yeah. Well, no. Unfortunately, I was wearing a helmet, but it was like it was like ting 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 ting. That middle sound, and then my helmet was like jarring.
Did they
around.
score points for that, or
It was interesting. It was an 8-point must system, so it was a lot
like boxing.
Yeah, it was like boxing, etc. So when he got the takedown, I was already 8-10. It was I was already 9-10. I was already down. So I was like, oh man, what am I gonna do? But it was my first. It was my first tournament of that type, and I remember pulling off.
And what year was that?
Oh, gosh, what, like 93?
Oh wow, a long time ago.
It was a long time ago, yeah. And I remember pulling off my helmet, and I kind of it was like they gave me a bottle of water. I go, I took half a swig and had to spit it out all over the floor because it was just heart racing and et cetera, et cetera. But that was a lot of fun. I have to admit. Yeah.
I love rule systems like that are so expansive. And I posted something on the Martial Culture podcast page. Well, this was about a few months ago. But did you see the Australian company that's building that tech suit where they can do MMA with swords and stuff? But they have this modern tech suit, and they score like what would be a death blow, but obviously nobody's dying. So it's like a suit, sort of like fencing.
I've actually seen the
video, right?
I've actually seen the video, and I think unfortunately the footage that they showed was not a good example of how that suit should have been utilized.
Yeah.
And the thing is, they were unclear because basically it was like, all right, fine. This was showing like
the possibilities.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, but don't feel sorry for them. That company has actually got a military contract now.
Oh, does it? Oh,
yeah, so they actually just posted on their Facebook page that
I stand corrected.
Yeah, they're not actually gonna put anything out there because they got some big military contract to be like a high tech hand-to-hand combat training tool.
They're making Iron Man, aren't they?
Yeah, basically, yeah, that's it. But it's a suit that would this would be a stab to the heart and you're dead. You would know, and it keeps track of, like in fencing where you hit the electronic button.
Oh yeah, right. Yeah,
so the suit does protect you, but at the same time, it tells you when you got killed without you actually getting killed, which is actually really good. Okay, hit in the neck. Okay, this would have killed me. Okay, I'm out.
It'd be great for video games. Let's
exactly.
do it.
No, that was the original thing. It was like we'll have a combative like UFC type tournament, but also the idea could be like, you get in with your friends and play like a game, like when nobody gets hurt.
Laser tag.
Yeah, laser tag. Exactly. And I'm not going to show off for that as long as people aren't getting hurt. And that was the thing. But you're right. The original promo video was not as great. Obviously it was choreographed, but still, I thought it was pretty cool. But I'm all in favor of these tournaments and these. I don't see MMA as the rules of the UFC. I see it as a movement that is encompassing many martial arts. It's like, let's cross-train and train in minimal rules scenarios. And the Dog Brothers, we mentioned before, the listeners are not familiar, Dog Brothers are an offshoot of the JKD organizations that do weapon MMA training, basically. If you can explain the Dog Brothers.
Yeah, sure. The Dog Brothers, it was started up by Mark Denny, among others. Yeah. And these guys were from the Inosanto Academy. And what these guys did was it started off as from what I understand is a weekend get together, and they were curious as to, hey, all of these Filipino martial arts moves that we've learned, all these intricate moves, etc. Okay, would they actually work if somebody coming after you, like for real time?
Yeah.
And they started experimenting with that, and their material was number one. The results of their experiments were, for a lot of the Filipino martial arts techniques that they knew, they were uniformly disappointing.
Right.
It just didn't work.
Yeah.
And then it's like, okay, fine. You know what? Let's take what we know and we'll start from scratch, and then we'll start building up, because it's like, first and foremost, what if somebody's going to swing at you really, really hard? Then we shall see. And,
It's UFC 1 all over again, right? Okay, we think this move works, but wait, it didn't.
Yeah.
Okay, let's revamp.
I will say that part of that, of course, is looking at, and in no way am I suggesting that these guys, that I know technically more than these guys. These guys are very, very, very well well researched. But
I've actually met Mark Denny. He's a jiu-jitsu guy too.
Oh, yeah, okay.
He knows his stuff.
But I will say that a lot of these things stem from the fact that the moves that you're practicing in a, like, let's say, in a more like technical martial arty aspect, they need context.
Yes.
And if you don't have context, then it's like you're gonna try to use an orange when you should be using an apple, as it were, and you are guaranteed to be disappointed. It's like, because it was not designed to be used here. And
if you listen to my podcast, we have a podcast called Context is King, and that's there's so many martial art moves we say, this doesn't work, but it was developed in a specific context. So in that context, Aikido could work. Where you're wearing armor and you're on a battlefield, you're not mobile. You don't have to worry about getting punched in the face. Okay, the armor makes you less mobile. Okay, some of these wrist lock techniques are possible, but in the modern world, the context is different. And you're a Wing Chun practitioner, and a lot of people say, Wing Chun doesn't work, blah, blah. Well, given the context of origin, maybe it is more functional. And also, that being said, one of the top kicks now, the oblique kick, is actually taken from the Wing Chun art. So, and I would say the hammer fist, which was a top traditional martial art, does not exist in boxing, was at one point the most common strike in MMA. Hammer fist on the ground, and so everything is about context. You're right. So anyway, I don't mean to.
Just waxing Wing Chun. Just briefly. Was it one of my classmates who is now a Wing Chun instructor in his own right? This was I think 2 years ago. His, or maybe a little while behind that, but he was like, you know what? I think we can use this as they called it, an oblique kick. And I was like, why not? You know what I mean? And he was like, start kicking, blah blah blah. And then sure enough, you see this video of John Jones oblique kicking these guys knees into
it's amazing.
Basically he's dusting that guy's knee joint. And I was like, wow.
And Thai boxers copied MMA, although I don't think anybody admit it. But you see Thai boxers doing it. Thai boxers did not do this 15 years ago. First time you saw it.
Yeah, I've seen teeps against the knee, against the thigh, etc. That's very common.
But also just the oblique kick too.
Oh yeah.
They did not do that 20 years ago, and now they're doing it. So obviously there's a dissemination of what works to every art, and that's what I love. It's like, okay, you say it works, let's try it, and then if it's the right context, it will work, But another thing is, I want to just talk about because you're really interesting. Your experiences, and you have so much knowledge in the Western knife tradition, Eastern knife traditions, how they're different, and going back on what the Filipino traditions are.
Okay.
And what do you see? It's interesting because I read this. I researched this book. I'm sure you're familiar with the Talhofer's, Schwabian combat fighting system. It's a 16th century book on sword fighting,
right.
And I use that as a basis as a basis in my grad work to kind of look at Japanese warfare in a comparative context, right?
Sure, yeah.
So looking at this manual of Eastern swordsmanship, and has grappling in it too, a lot of grappling against a knife. But I'm interested in in this movement of historical European martial arts, abbreviated HEMA, is huge now, and you have that fencing background. I know you're so knowledgeable on this. Just touch on I would like to broadly go over what you see as this is what I see as the Filipino tradition. These are my experiences in the Western sport tradition, could be in the fencing tradition, and just an overview for it. And remember, our listeners have some of these that have no kali or eskrima or knife fighting experience, but just how you see that world for those of us who are more in the unarmed world. What do you see the movement and how they historically are different or the same, or I'm just interested in your take, and it could be anything.
Well, what I would say is this: if you're talking about martial arts, to a certain extent, all martial arts, and by this, you can see the little like R next to the martial arts, right? That have been disseminated for public consumption. They're largely the same. What do I mean by that? What I mean is that they're more than calisthenics, okay? But what you have these like what I would term energy drills, It's not really just a dance. There are combative applications, but a lot of
flow drills.
Yeah, they're flow.
Drills.
Yeah, basically they're flow
Yeah.
drills. Yeah,
Yeah.
That's an excellent term. Yeah, they're basically flow drills. Flow is important, But if you think about it, what the flow means is that it's like at the end of the day when you want to hurt somebody or okay, fine, let's say stop someone. Okay, that's when the flow stops. You know what I mean? He's like the flow is stopped because he's been stopped. He's been stopped. Right? Yeah. So hence, of course you want to be able to flow back and forth, et cetera, et cetera. But then, but then a lot of what actually happens is when the flow is changed, when the that thing is broken. Okay. That being said, what you'll find is that all martial arts are like this, because especially I think if you're talking about weaponry, this is the 21st century, and for the most part, people don't really come after each other with long swords, or spears, or what have you. So even if an instructor, via his own experience, or via the experience of his teacher, okay, had a view on, let us say, what it is to like break somebody's face with a stick, or to or put the knife in, as it were. Okay, these are things which they probably wouldn't put in their in their martial arts teachings. It's not something which it's not something that you really see outside of a sport context where I'm going for a touch, let us say. Okay, I've been studying these arts for quite a while, but I'll be the first to admit, guess what? I've never had to come after somebody with a weapon and hurt them, specifically,
right,
to hurt them. I mean, that's not my personal experience,
right.
And
you haven't been on a battlefield,
yeah,
and you haven't,
exactly.
exactly.
I'm not a soldier. Yeah. I'm not an LEO.
Yeah.
I don't pretend to be. Okay. And it was and here's the other thing. I think that, like, let's say I did have that experience outside of those two contexts. Okay. I think I would be loath to discuss it.
Right. That's true.
I mean, I'll use this as an example. My very good friend of mine, a friend of my father's, I always called him Uncle Cal. Okay, guy was a jackass. All right, and I never understood why my dad was such good friends with him, and I found out that in the this was like the late '60s, he and Uncle Cal got into this fight out in Chinatown, and Uncle Cal saved his life. And he took a knife. He took a knife from my dad, and it was something they never discussed for obvious reasons, and it was like, so that's why they're brothers.
Somebody takes a knife for you. That's why
they're brothers. Holy shoot, like, yeah, exactly. Uncle Cal, jackass, but he saved my dad's life. Yeah. So it's one of those things where outside of those contexts, it's like, what are you showing people?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, what exactly are you teaching them? So hence the flow drills.
Interesting. Judo is the same way, and we said there's a defanging to be more socially conscious. So let's teach something that's not calisthenics, a little more than that. It's a combative sport, but we're not showing things that can really, really, really give knowledge to people that's going to be not positive for society. And there was a Chinese martial artist, and he's kind of an idiot, but he said something about critical of the Gracies, and he's like, I hate MMA and I hate the Gracies, and I'm like, okay, let me watch this. Let's see what this guy has to say. And he's kind of an idiot, but I think you know the guy I'm talking about too, right? He's Asian American, he has long hair. Anyway, but he said something that was actually kind of true. He's like, now even idiots know how to fight. and it's there was a guy, there was a guy attacking a police officer it was a video I posted, not on the martial culture page but a different page. It's in Australia, and the cop is trying to arrest him, and he's like bobbing and weaving and throwing punches, and he clinches and does a beautiful kosotogake outside trip and like wrecking the cop. Thank God the cop had backup. Man, if it was just that cop and that perp, the cop would have been dead. And you're like, whoa, yeah, this isn't the jerkhead, the jackass who knows how to fight. That is a terrible thing to have in society. Not good to teach jerks how to fight. And MMA is sometimes kind of doing that. My answer to that is this. I can't be responsible for anybody other than myself and my students, and I'll do my best to prepare them to be good people and good fighters. And then outside of that, I can't control the world. But it's interesting you should say that, because I think that was Kano's observation too. It's like, let's defang the arts a little bit to be more socially conscious. So, but go ahead, just keep going.
Okay, but just to continue, so outside of those, like basically LEO, etc., soldier context, how do you then get a window in on like the real application of this, and you're left with a sportive application, and that's like there are those who have a very dim view of such things. I do not. They're like, well, yeah, hey, given that I'm neither a soldier nor a policeman, but I want a window on this, and part of that window comes from I've been lucky. Some of my teachers, they've had direct experience, they were soldiers,
right.
etc. But not me. So it's like, okay, son. So how do I get a window on this? And how you get a window on this, I think, is via different kinds of competition, or I should rephrase that: different kinds of sportive application. So what'll happen is that, yeah, sure, you run the scenario where it's like the guy doesn't want, he doesn't want you to succeed, right? He's doing everything in his power to make you fail, and usually this takes the form of some kind of dueling system.
Yeah.
Hence back when I did fencing, what I didn't realize at the time was the rule set for fencing largely came from the concept of, all right, fine, I'm training you to fight a civilian duel, all right,
right.
With like some weapon,
Mm-hmm.
all right, and I, as your teacher, say, hey, you know what? You must always defend yourself first, because otherwise it's going to be double strike, which means that, yeah, you know what, you're both right. Both guys are headed to the hospital or worse.
Yeah.
Exactly. So it's like, and with that concept, it's like, okay, man, you know what? We're going to develop a rule set points where it's like, if you don't defend yourself first, guess what?
You're dead.
Yeah. What happens is he gets the point and you don't.
Right.
This is purely observing the sportive rule set. Okay, clearly there's
that's
a lot,
Western fencing.
Yeah, that's Western fencing, exactly.
And
clearly there's a lot more to it than that.
Right.
Yeah.
And what is the rule set in Filipino martial arts in competitive settings?
Well, what happens is that they have a couple. There's one that I was exposed to that is very much like Western fencing, which is a lot like the point system from karate, where it's like, oh, you know what, was it the person who strikes first gets the point, etc. But most of the rule sets and systems that I've been exposed to, they're like a continuous fighting, so it's close to an 8-point must system, like in boxing. Okay, and you can kind of do that because you've got the sticks and the armor, and and
different with swords.
And you go from there, exactly. Yeah, different with swords, where it's like, you know what, halt, halt, attack, counterattack, this side goes, boom, etc. It's still points, and ultimately anyone will game that system. After all, you're an athlete. You're looking to improve your record. Why wouldn't you, do X, Y, and Z? So I think that with that idea fully in place, I think it is really the responsibility of the people who develop these formats to say, okay, fine, you know what? I want to preserve like some kind of martial aspect to this sport. Okay, let's do this. You know what? Everybody who goes in to get like double shots, no points. You know, like in fencing. I happen to like that rule because it means that you must hit and not be hit in return.
Right.
You know, okay, fine. Some people are like, I remember this is one fellow from my team. It was Andre. He was blindingly fast. Okay, he could hit you and he could be out of range. You know, before you could counterattack. But he could be timed. You know, so it's like, hey, yeah, that's right. You want to play that game? Sure. You know, but let's see you do this in a more orthodox fashion. Make sure that he can't hit you first before you hit him.
Right.
You know, to my mind, that kind of concept, that martial concept, can be applied to more than just basic fencing.
Yeah. Sounds like Elliot Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. First, don't lose.
Yeah, there you
First,
go.
don't lose. Then he'll get tired and you can counterattack.
Right.
But first, don't lose.
Yeah. Well,
Defense first. Interesting.
Yeah, the idea here from fencing and to certain Filipino martial arts rule sets is that if his weapon is in line, in other words, guess what? I'm threatening you. All right. You must do something about that. You can't just ignore it and rely on things like blinding speed or just raw guts in order to be able to score first. Okay, because hey, yeah, that's just bad practice. You know, they can't have that happen. We got to do something else. Okay, fine. And once again, it gets a little bit more murky when you're talking about non-edged weapons training. As an example, the SEAC tournament that I mentioned previously, was it that is closer to boxing?
Yeah.
You know, hence not a particularly good representative of edged weapons training. You know, same thing with I did a bunch of Dose Pars tournaments back in the day.
And Dose Pars
that is another was it the Filipino martial art, a fairly famous one. I never studied it. I know some people who did, but they cover similar aspects: single stick, double stick, stick and dagger, etc. The arts all tend to be quite expansive in that way. And there was just a single stick tournament, and the rule set was essentially another 8-point must system. But there, I'm sorry to say, the realism started to go out the window, because they would do these fanning strikes. I'll show it to you, someday. But basically, they would whirl their sticks around very, very quickly, and they would try to hit you as many times in just a few seconds as possible. And make no mistake,
like Kyokushin tournaments.
Yeah.
And for the listeners who don't know, Kyokushin is a very powerful martial arts. Great, I'm not but basically what you do is you stand in front of the guy and you play Rock'em Sock'em Robots.
Yeah, exactly.
That is not really smart.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, make no mistake. Getting like getting knuckles to the rib cage, or getting like these fanning strikes to your head and the rest of your body, no fun. That's for certain. But in the end, these things tend to fall apart when somebody decides, well, you know what, I've had enough of this. And either number one, as you mentioned a little bit earlier in this discussion, I'm just going to wrap you up and bring you down, all right, which is fairly natural. Or I'm going to get tired of Rock'em Sock'em Robots, and I'm going to go for overhand right and try and clip you on the jaw. Because I'm just tired. I'm just tired of like all of these strikes, which make no mistake are dangerous and they hurt, but I want it to be over, so bang. There we go.
That's how are we doing on time, by the way?
We are about 4 minutes left until we have to start wrapping
So
up.
yeah.
Oh wow! Wow, we've been speaking that long. My goodness.
It was a great conversation. I just want to touch on one great, really awesome information here, and I think a lot of our listeners are not weapons-based guys, so it's nice to get a different perspective, and it's so interesting to hear those commonalities. But one thing I wanted, and you kind of touched on it. It's there's the dueling, and then there's there's military combat, and then there's actual street assault. And I posted an article a little while ago where it was a guy who's a knife guy, and he said edged weapon defense and edged weapon combat are completely different. Meaning, if you're walking down the street, whether you have a weapon or not, the guy's going to jump you, and you're not going to be able to pull it out. And he's probably going to stab you from an oblique angle. And he studied like 1,000 videos and showed that I frame with one hand and shank you with the other, or put my knife to your throat before you can even, deploy your weapon. So like edge weapon defense in the civilian context versus dueling or military training where you're on the battlefield, and you have your weapon deployed because you're on a battlefield, is they're totally different contexts.
You mentioned that about context being all, and I thoroughly agree with that. A lot of what you learn in terms of, we'll go back to like martial arts, in particular weapons bearing arts, even Filipino martial arts for that matter. As I said, flow drills, of energy drills of one description or another, and they have to be understood in context. As you say, if you're talking about civilian like a knife assault, or we'll call them counteroffensive, right?
Yeah.
Arguably, there's like very little overlap because, like I'm of the opinion that if you're really serious about personal safety, the physical aspect of it is way down that curve. You've you're at the last like 10-15% at that point.
Yeah.
In which case, what you actually bring to bear physically, it's important. Of course, technically there are things that need to be addressed, but there's a whole 80% of everything
Right.
else that's far more important. But back to a context just for a moment. So yes, you're talking about like something which, in this case, civilian assault. It's not a duel. It's not combat. It's basically it's an ambush.
Right. It's an ambush. Right. Exactly.
It's assassination, as it were.
Yeah.
And arguably, there's no technique for that other than the aforementioned like 85%.
Yeah.
That's what keeps you safe.
Yeah.
Not any specific physical.
You mentioned the sportive applications, and there's so many people in the combatives world that sneer on that, but. And yeah, it's not assassination defense, but I think it helps you develop, understanding of your body in combat. Basically, you understand how to use your body better, and that can really, really help you to survive. But what you do is different. How you prepare is different. But what I'm saying is, I was doing the self-defense class yesterday with one of my students, and he's a good boxer, but he kept staying in range. And I said, look, if I have a knife, get out of range. And he's like, oh, but I want to count you back. I'm like, dude, I have a knife. You have a fist. Get out of range. Your first thing should be survival, not thinking about, oh, I'm in a boxing match and I have to stay boxing because I have to win this boxing match. And, the sportive training, while it's great to develop the timing and the reflexes and this, it sometimes makes you think in ways that will hamper your survival. And MMA too. Like if I'm in an MMA fight, I'm thinking I have to beat this guy in 3 rounds. But if I'm in a street fight and there's 2 guys, it's like I gotta get away. I gotta move to a safe zone. And you don't think about disengagement as much.
I think that number one, martial. If you're talking about self-defense and counteroffense, number one, you're whatever art you study or should address that to one extent or another.
Yeah.
But I always like to look at it kind of like the Nike defense, but not just in terms of running away. There's actually like something that was impressed upon me some years ago by one of my college instructors. Like, if you can't do anything else, take a shoe off,
right?
And and put it on your hand. You know what I mean? It's like it's ridiculous, and yet and yet you got this thing. It's made out of leather and rubber. That's not your flesh.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's like,
or your jacket or something.
Jacket
Yeah,
or what have you.
exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Improvised weaponry is key, right? But I think the Nike defense is, run away. But no, improvised weaponry is key. It's absolutely distance management, improvised weaponry, and survival, which is something, you don't have to worry about dying for the most part in a boxing or an MMA match. I mean, it happens, but most of that is due to weight cutting or things like that. But you don't really have to worry about dying. We're in a street fight, or like a mugging or an attempted, criminal assault. You may not get out of there. So your priorities have to be completely different. And what I have a problem with, guys who train weapon arts, whether it's or even MMA too, but weapon arts is like they just want to duel. They don't back off. Like you have to think of survival first, and what most people train, and I said this before, is they don't train self-defense, they train ego defense, because they're not worried about the actual like life-threatening assault where a guy's like trying to stab you in the alley. They're worried about like the guy making them look bad in front of a girl in front of a bar. Like that's what they're worried about, right? They don't want to look like a chump. So most people I find that train any martial art, they're worried about embarrassment more than self-defense, and like it's totally different. And now the reflexes you get from training in a dueling context, whether dueling is MMA, whether dueling is the stick tournament, can help you learn your body better. But what you want to do to survive an actual life or death encounter should be very, very different. Then I think the defense first aspect of what you're saying before in one term is really good.
Yeah, I think that few people are going to know such things, and thank goodness, right? So it's not going to be something that comes naturally. It's not like, oh wow, yeah, that's right. I get jumped all the time. It's like that. No, of course not.
It depends where you live, though.
But exactly. And there's some who that's a fact of life.
Yeah, right.
Okay?
We're very lucky. We live in a relatively safe area.
Exactly. So I said by few. Yeah, exactly. Depends on where you live. Exactly. Yeah, I grew up in a middle class neighborhood, and
right. We don't have to deal with these issues, right?
Yeah, I've been lucky that way. Like if, as you say, if the first thing if your first instinct from encountering that kind of situation is to duel, that has to be addressed. That definitely has to be addressed. I don't think that I don't think that many martial arts instructors would misrepresent themselves that way, but it is an easy thing to misunderstand.
Yeah,
I think it's a very easy thing to misunderstand.
I don't think that martial arts instructors intentionally misrepresent. I think they're so brought up in the dueling context. And this goes to MMA, it goes to karate, taekwondo, whatever. We're so brought up in the dueling context, we only see that. Yeah. So we don't think about any other options. Like, okay, I'm training fighters. I train them to fight like this, and that's what I'm going to do in a street fight. Except, it's not appropriate because the guy has, a knife and two buddies. And I, instead of having this concentrated awareness, I need a diffuse awareness of my surroundings and what's going on. And I still think full contact, limited rules training, right? Meaning in a dueling context, is the best way to prepare your body for combat. But it is not combat. It is not self-defense combat. It is dueling combat, which is different. It's more akin to being in a battlefield because two armies go at each other and they're not retreating, and you don't run away, and there's a place for that. But when you're ambushed, when you're that victim of assassination, like we always talk about, your energy systems are at a low because probably you got sucker punched or stabbed. So instead of being at 100%, you're at your physical attributes are at maybe 50 or 40%, who knows. So you have to use that technique to survive first, escape, or counterattack. And survive, escape is first. Counterattack is second, and that's something that, especially when the more ego-driven academies that I've been to, it's always about like, getting the tap out, not getting tapped, like engaging in the fight. And this is a different mentality has to be shifted, and also this is not a criticism of MMA, but some guys I know are very into concealed carry or something like that. I'm like, if a guy ambushes you, you're not, and the statistics prove it. A guy ambushes you, probably are not going to bring that weapon to bear, because he's going to get you when you don't have it, or when it's in your pocket, or he comes behind you and you're unable to draw, gun or knife or whatever, right?
I think that, like I said, it largely depends on your neighborhood. The world,
where you live in the world,
where you live in the world. But let's assume for briefly that we're discussing, that we're discussing, like middle class individuals, living in and around, let's say this area of New York City,
right.
Then it's like, then I would say that someone who like conceals carry to the point where it would make a difference. That's a bit overkill. That's a bit overkill.
Yeah.
But there we go.
I think we
Yeah. So my solution to not being caught off guard when I have my concealed carry, I just walk around with my gun in my hand. I'm
like
ready
in
to
Texas,
go.
right? They go to
That's
Starbucks
right, yeah,
with their
yeah.
M16.
I'm ready to go. But yeah. So I'm going to be the white blanket and put the end on the conversation. Please, Eugene, please come back another time. I think we could spend another hour discussing all the intricacies of all this. We do have another listener question. I don't know how they're getting through because we're not live, but we do have another listener question real quick.
Okay.
It's from Wade Wilson.
Wait,
Yeah,
good
he
Lord.
wants to know, is it possible to actually cut a bullet in half with a knife or a sword?
Yes.
There's a video of a samurai doing it on a modern day modern day guy. They shoot a gun at him. He slices the bullet in half.
Well, thanks, Wade, for that message. And then next week, I'll bring my gun and you bring your knives, and we'll test it out.
That's right. That's
Beautiful.
right.
I don't have a gun. Just
The challenge has been made.
the gauntlet thrown. Any parting words before we
No, I just want to say thank you, Eugene, for taking a wonderful time and having this great conversation. And I hope you come back too, because we just touched the surface of this issue, and you're so knowledgeable. You train so many different martial arts. It's great to have your perspective. And people realize Eugene's actually pretty freaking good at jiu-jitsu too, and judo and striking. So
yeah. Remember we talk about jiu-jitsu.
Yeah. The guy's got the most evil mount. He's the pressure on the mount you've ever seen. But very proud to call him my student. And thank you for making time to come here and having such a great discussion. And just shifting gears away from the sport of MMA, but like I said, the larger MMA way of thinking that I think is making all martial arts better. Just how we explore and cross-train and think about what we do.
I think that and this is something which I'll end with first and foremost. Thank you so much for inviting me. This was a pleasure. But secondly, I think that we can end on the concept that the attitude and the training methodologies which MMA had brought to the fore are like those are the things which have turned things around for a lot of people, myself included. I mean, make no mistake. Make no mistake. These last 10 years have been incredible. They have indeed. But with that, hey, thanks so much.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Right.
Thanks, everybody, for listening. Please rate, subscribe, share the show on all your social medias. And Conor McGregor still not in jail, so we'll keep that watch
Yeah,
going.
that's right. Yeah, he's not in jail.
All right, we'll check you next time. Thanks, everybody.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.